It's 2 minutes past 2, and we're going to start. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Małgosia Rybak, and I'm Climate Change and Energy Director at CEPI. And today I'm going to be your moderator. And I'm going to guide you through a session where we're going to discuss the Fit for 55 package, and especially those elements that can help industry and the transition and at the same time staying competitive at the global level. And I have to admit, when we first came up with the idea for the session, we were operating in a completely different environment. And today, for many of our colleagues, it's a luxury to talk about the 2030 framework while they're trying to get their operations still running and provide essential goods around Europe and the problems are obviously the high energy prices that have been skyrocketing in the last days and the last weeks. But one thing remains unchanged, so our industry's commitment to reaching 2050 goals. And also something that was mentioned in the Commission communication last week, Repower EU, the directions and the tools also seem to be the same. So investing in switching to renewables and improving our energy efficiency across the sector. And today with me, I have 4 speakers that are going to unbundle the Fit for 55 package, and together we're going to pin down the elements that are going to help the industry to make this leap to reaching climate neutrality, but also reaching the new updated 2030 goals. And I see that Heiko has disappeared, but in any case, I have Walburga Hemesberger, who's CEO of Solar Power Europe, Alexander Tudoriu, who's Policy Director in Cogen Europe, and Stefan Sudman, who's Vice President for Public Affairs in UPM. And once we have Heiko back, so we also have Heiko Kunst, who's acting head of ETS unit in DG Klima. We were supposed to start with Heiko, but we're going to jump straight to Walburga. And yes, we saw last week a lot of attention given to renewable electricity. And the reason why we wanted to hear from you is because affordable clean energy is at the core of our policy asks. Around half of electricity that we're using in our industry, we need to buy from the grid. So we wanted to hear from you, what are the key elements of the proposal and of the Fit for 55 to, first of all, get the renewable electricity off the ground and make it affordable for the industry?
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much, Małgosia, and thanks very much for the invitation. Indeed, Repower EU has set the tone very clearly. We need to electrify and we need to have more renewables. Solar, that's a good news, is by now, together with wind, the cheapest electricity source. So we are not really burdening ourselves by investing in more renewables in Europe. On the contrary, we're investing in very cheap electricity. We're outperforming any fossil alternatives by far. Let me tell you a little bit where we stand as a solar sector, and then answer what you just asked me, Małgosia, on what do we need in order to accelerate and to go faster, given not just climate urgency, but the current circumstances, obviously, which we are also all very sad to see. So globally, we're entering into a terawatt era. A terawatt, that's 1,000 gigawatts. Just 10 years ago, in 2012, we had some 100 gigawatt installed. In a couple of weeks, we will have 1,000 gigawatt installed, 1 terawatt. So in only a few years' time, just 10 years later. What does it mean for Europe? In Europe, we added some 26 gigawatt last year. Before the war, we were forecasting to hit 30 gigawatt already this year. And the prospect of installing 50 gigawatts, so double of what we've installed last year by 2025. That was a business as usual scenario, not even our high scenario. We have already called for going faster before the 23rd of February. We were asking for 45% renewables. Since the 23rd of February, it's now crystal clear from our perspective that we need to go much faster. We need to become independent from Russian imports. And companies like the ones in the pulp and paper industry need to have competitive energy prices. Małgosia, you mentioned it. It's all about competitiveness, and everyone is worrying, not just households, but in particular also companies, how to pay the very high prices we see today. So in the very short term, what can we do? We're asked, what can we do until next winter? We call for accelerated investments in solar PV to reach 39 gigawatt at the end of this year instead of the 30, which we have been counting to reach in any way. This is in particular possible by unlocking the rooftop potential. And I'm saying this because you probably also have companies, the ones who are also participating here today, that have roofs. This is something which can be done very, very fast. So solar PV on all new buildings, that's what we are asking for, and support schemes to cover 20% of the investment costs, just to be fast and do whatever we can in the next couple of months. And as of 2025, we think we can add 100 gigawatt in our accelerated scenario. So instead of 50, we think we can add 100 gigawatt by 2025 to reach ultimately 1 terawatt in Europe by 2030. And I'm coming back to my 1 terawatt at the beginning. We're reaching this 1 terawatt globally this year, and we are very confident that we can reach it in Europe by 2030 if we accelerate. So what does it need? And I'm trying to be very brief. In addition to the higher renewables target, which we've been calling for in any way for some time already, I just came from a meeting in the European Parliament where the different political groups are now teaming up to call for higher renewables targets. Even the Commission, Mechthild Wörsthofer was there, said they're encouraging the Parliament and the Council to look at higher renewables target than the ones they proposed themselves, the higher renewables target. But we also need a very clear political signal for long-term investments. What we see today in many member states is that governments are panicking, are introducing short-term, sometimes retroactive measures, windfall profit tax, you name it, clawback measures. This is not helping long-term investments, and we very much appreciate that the Commission has been putting forward some guidance on it. What else does it need in addition to the long-term investment signals? Much faster permitting. We were just discussing in the Parliament permitting. What can we do to go faster? Solar can be installed very fast. Solar is very versatile and can be installed very fast if you let us install it. And if the permitting is not taking too much. Today, it's 2 to 3 years on average, and that needs to change. We have a couple of very concrete ideas. Maybe we still have time to go into more detail, but there's a couple of things we can do very, very quickly to accelerate permitting. And then we need to have land for new projects. I mean, to give you an idea, roughly 50% of the solar we're installing is on roofs, so you don't need any additional space. But the other part is using land. What we need is really providing land for big solar projects, also for projects that you can use and have PPAs signing for these projects. So Repower EU is already proposing to identify go-to areas for PV deployment, and that is really critical to get that going. And then last but not least, because we have you representing your sector here today, companies play a major role pushing for more renewables. The PPA market, power purchase agreements, has taken off in Europe, but we can do much, much more. So there is obviously a whole framework, which we're also trying to convince policymakers at the time in the Renewables Directive to improve the framework for PPAs. The Commission has already proposed very, very good ideas how to get a better framework. Guarantees of origin play a very important role. But this is something where you as companies can play a very important role, and where you can, by the way, also make sure that you have visibility on the electricity prices going forward for the next couple of years by signing PPAs. and not be dependent on electricity market prices. So I stop here. I think I've made a couple of points. Happy to discuss further.
Thank you, Walburga. And maybe what is worth mentioning, one of your initiatives to support putting PVs on the rooftops of buildings, of industrial plants, we're looking into that. So we should have some more visibility on what is possible on our land and on our buildings in a few months. But now we have Heiko back. So just a reminder, acting head of unit of the looking at the ETS and DG Klima. And well, you know our industry probably more than anyone, our track record in decoupling the production and emissions. And if you were to pin down the elements of the ETS proposal, the changes that you think are the most crucial for yes, supporting the front runners in the industrial transition, what are the elements of that framework?
Yes, thank you very much, Mafgosia, and good afternoon, everybody. And my apologies for the technical issues. I tried to fix them provisionally and may find a better solution after my intervention. On the ETS proposal, I think it's first of all important to recall the objective of this proposal. Well, it's basically to deliver on the 2030, but also on the 2050 targets. But maybe that's less important in the context we are now in this event, also to extend emission trading to other sectors, because so far it was mainly power and industry and aviation to some extent, but the idea is to use this successful instrument also for other sectors. When we look at instruments to support industrial frontrunners and innovation more in general, I think we basically have two instruments. It is the free location we give to industry, and we do have the innovation fund to support innovative projects. So maybe let's take a little bit of time to look into these two tools. Starting with free location, I think what you can see from the Commission's proposal is that we maintain the general approach, meaning free location, well, is a priori, it's still provided. And we use the approach based on benchmarks, and that already gives incentives to those who are more efficient than others, because in the very early days of the ETS, the free location was basically determined by historical emissions, and that did not give an incentive to reduce, because then you get immediately less in the next round. Now it's based on benchmarks, on performance benchmarks, and on production levels. A second, I think also important element, and probably also for your sector,
I think we lost Heiko. But while we're waiting for him to come back, I will remind our participants that it's possible to also put questions in the chat. And I see that Yori has already put the question to Walburga. We're going to come back to that after we go through all the speakers and their interventions. Yes, so while we're waiting for Heiko, maybe it's good we heard a little bit about the ETS, the changes that were made in the history of the ETS since 2005, and how the free allocation is working right now and what the plans are. So while he's trying to come back to us, we have Alexandra. So another part of the policy framework that is important for the industry is also looking at energy efficiency. And we also know that part of our, cogeneration plays an important part in our industry to reach higher energy efficiency improvements. And my question would be more about the framework that you see securing the investments that we see happening right now in the last few years, literally this year, so that they can also deliver for climate neutrality in the 2030 framework.
Yes, so thank you very much as well for the invitation. Indeed, cogeneration is one of the best available efficiency solutions in industry. Pulp and paper is one of those industries. There's CHP is used broadly in the chemical sector, in alumina and food and drink, even the hospitality sector, and it's one of the technology of choice for industry. And we must really remember that industry requires a lot of heat, a lot of high and medium temperature heat for their industrial processes. And to deliver that heat, it's not always feasible to electrify. Maybe some of the heat can be electrified, but not all. And therefore, we really need to produce that heat in the most efficient way possible, which is where CHP comes into play. We hear a lot of industrial operators of CHP saying that they really must rely on the continuous and secure supply of heat to stay competitive. For an alumina plant, for instance, stopping their heat for several hours could cost them millions of euro. So it is really that important to have that secure supply of heat. And in fact, CHP today is one of those solutions that supplies heat and power in the most efficient way possible and costs competitively. The next step for cogeneration in industry is indeed to switch to lower carbon and renewable energy sources. And this is already happening. We have in your sector as well, quite a lot of the CHP already relies on renewable energy sources. We also see a lot of EU projects and in innovation where CHPs are upgraded to increasingly run on local renewables. So PV and wind is stored as hydrogen, and then the CHP can use up to 2030, even 100% of the hydrogen as soon as it becomes available. So I think the transitional phase that we're in at the moment is really calling for more available and more affordable renewable energy sources for industrial CHP. And this is what the policy framework should promote. So we are supportive of ambitious objectives. We're supportive of the overall ambition of Fit for 55. However, we think that there must be some coherence between the ambition, the objectives, and the timelines to actually achieve those objectives. So we must start by being as efficiently as possible and then push for as many renewables to come through, but do not oblige operators to meet certain shares of renewables when those fuels are not there. So I think all these elements need to happen at the same time, and we must push ambitiously for both efficiency and renewables. But there needs to also be some coherent timeline to be able to achieve it cost effectively. So that's really my my initial contribution, and I'm happy to develop on that in the Q&A.
Thank you, Alexandra. So, dear audience, if you have any questions that are directed to any of our speakers, please don't be shy and use the chat box. And yes, now it's up to Stefan. And my question to you is that we heard already about the energy part, about switching to renewable energy, about improving energy efficiency, but there is much more to our industry that we can offer with renewable recycled products. And if you look at the framework that we have now, what are the elements that are still missing?
Thanks, Malgosia. Yeah, I'd say that exactly as you said, we have plenty of things to offer. We are a sector based on renewables. We are a sector with a wide range of climate solutions. And our approach looks on the whole value chain. So using a raw material which is domestic, which is not fossil, and it's growing more and more every day within the European Union. And we have a long proof of managing the forests. And I think if you're asking me what we are missing, I think on this side we have maybe even a bit too much of restrictions when it comes to the management of forest. And what I mean with that is the question of, do we really have a holistic approach to the forests, and how to proceed with sort of sustainable approach to forests. But as said, we are using this renewable raw material to produce then renewable products to substitute fossils. And we do it with a very, very low carbon footprint. I guess our sector is roughly 1.5% of all EU emissions when it comes to the ETS sector. And we've been able to reduce our emissions as a sector already by some 30% since the start or the beginning of the emission trading scheme. And I would say that we are not either missing too much of regulation or different kind of approaches when it comes to our production processes. So we have the emission trading, we have the energy efficiency requirements, we have obligations to increase renewables. And we've done all of these, and that's sort of the path we are going forward with. But then in the end, we are not only discussing energy and, let's say, energy related solutions to self-sufficiency or to combat climate change. We should also be looking even more and more towards renewable and recycled products that can replace fossils in the consumption side. So because by the end of the day, all of us are consumers, and I think we could have more and more emphasis also in policies on how we consume and what kind of materials we are using in the products we are consuming. Because this substitution is something we will really need there in the end if we want to get rid of fossils. And if I look on the competitiveness angle of our sector, of course, we are in global competition. We are in global markets where our products are also priced, and there's constant competition. And especially now in these times we are facing now, especially here in Europe, I'd say it's very, very important that besides all the existing carbon leakage measures we have in place, so as Heiko said, the free allocation, the innovation fund, we should definitely now focus on ensuring the competitiveness of our economies and our industries, as we want to become more, let's say, less dependent on imports and more self-sufficient in our approach. And we will need a lot of investments. Today we know that we will have a huge transformation of the energy system, which will require competitive companies that are willing and able to invest in the European Union. And that requires predictability, it requires competitiveness, and it doesn't as such require any kind of changes in the regulatory landscape, but rather we would need a stable and predictable regulatory landscape that is then sort of promoting different kind of investments within industries. And here, my final point, energy availability and affordability are necessities to ensure this kind of transformation to become more self-sufficient within the European Union and at the same time become, let's say, less dependent on fossils and less dependent on fossils in the imports. So I guess one point I'd raise here is also that biomass is very natural for us. We know how to use it. We know our practices in the forests, and our sector is based on this kind of renewable raw material. And biomass is domestic. Most of the biomass we are using in our sector is from the European Union. It's renewable and can be used as material, but also the residue streams from our industry can be used, for example, then in CHP, producing industrial heat for the processes, but also then electricity. And we can also then utilize different residue streams to produce different kind of new products or energy sources, like, for example, UPM is producing, and also advanced biofuels. We will also, to ensure that sort of affordable energy is available, we will for sure need to focus also on all available low carbon energy sources. So we can't sort of in any way close any doors. And I think that's very important also when we talk about, for example, nuclear, which is, in my view, having some kind of renaissance here through the crisis we are facing. It's still something we can also manage from sort of a sustainability point of view, and ensure that sort of the whole value chain and life cycle of nuclear can be properly managed. It will also require grid stability. It will require sort of huge investments to the grid to ensure that industrial operations can operate in a stable grid, that we have enough and affordable electricity available, and we will need a lot of balancing for the system, which is then both from the, let's say, supply side, but also then from the consumer side, flexibility, where we also have some experience already to sort of act as a flexible consumer in our behavior in the energy system. So maybe those kind of remarks I'd left at this point.
Thank you, Stefan. And before we jump into some questions that we prepared for the panel to discuss, Valborga, there is a question from Yari. Maybe you already saw it in the chat. It is encouraging that there is potential for greater capacity for solar in Europe. There are two questions: whether your industry is going to be able to keep up with this fast pace and even faster than what is being proposed by the politician, your industry, and where PV should be produced. What's your view on that one?
Thanks very much for that question, Yori. Because if I would have asked you to pose me a question, that would have been exactly the question. You can read my thoughts. So, very important questions actually. Will we be able to gear up and deliver on this 100 gigawatt as of 2025? Yes. We are very confident. It doesn't take a long time actually to have more production capacities. Just to give you an example of another country which we are quite dependent on actually, and that's relating to my second to the answer of your second question. So China, they are front runners in deploying renewables. They had installed 50 gigawatt last year. This year, they will install almost double. That's what we are proposing as well as of 2025. Instead of the 50 gigawatt we would have installed in any way without any higher ambitions, we are calling for 100 gigawatt as of 2025. They don't have any bottlenecks when it comes to getting the panels they need for this deployment, and we are pretty confident that as globally solar is thriving, the production companies are also gearing up as we speak. We know that we're gearing up as we speak, so we're confident. On the second question, I mentioned it already, we're for many elements dependent on Asia, not on the raw material, polysilicon, for example. We produce that in Europe to a large extent, and other elements as well of the system, inverters. We have very strong global players. But it's true that parts of the supply chain are coming predominantly from China. But we are working since 3 years now on a strategy to close the gaps we have in our supply chain in Europe. We have very interesting projects, innovative technologies. They are gearing up now, and we hope to see 20 gigawatt of production in Europe by 2025 already. And then scaling up further, because what we need is scale in order to be competitive. And that's what we're working on now, also together with the European Commission. We have a lot of support from Commissioner Breton and Commissioner Simpson on the European Solar Initiative, as we call it. So we are gearing up on that one as well, because it's clear. And it has become more clear than ever now in these days that we need strategic autonomy when we talk about securing our energy needs, also in the production.
Thank you, Valborga. I hope that, I mean, your answer was already quite comprehensive in touching upon the question that we had placed prepare for the panel. So maybe I go to Alexandra. We were thinking about the transition, and we've been in this conversation since well, years now, with higher ambition coming with the new commission, even for 2050 and 2030. But how do you see this transition going? What are the actors that play the biggest role? What do you need from other actors that maybe are lagging behind a little bit?
Yes, so in terms of the ambition towards carbon neutrality, Cogen Europe is committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050, with cogeneration, of course, contributing towards higher efficiency, more resiliency of the energy system, and higher integration of renewable energy, of course. But if we look back at the 2020 targets, for instance, for renewable energy, energy efficiency, and emission reductions, we see that there has indeed been lots of progress in boosting renewable energy in the electricity sector. Not so much when it comes to renewable energy penetration in the heat sector as well as the gas sector. And this is unfortunately quite topical in the situation we're in today with the Ukraine crisis, where suddenly we want to diversify gas supply and find local renewable gas sources that can reduce our dependence on imports. So that's something to take into account, that unless we make the whole energy system more renewable and more efficient, we cannot only rely on electricity. Industry cannot, and the residential sector cannot fully rely on the electricity. Then when it comes to energy efficiency, that's another target where the EU has barely made it in 2020, and that's mostly thanks to, and unfortunately, thanks to the to a decrease in in our economy. So economic downturns, first due to the euro crisis, and then more recently due to the pandemic. So again, we cannot be counting on a decrease in economic and industrial production to meet our energy efficiency targets. So that's where we think can be done more, energy efficiency. Of course, we cannot put a cap on industrial production. That's definitely not what we're calling for. In the residential sector and in the building sector, it's definitely important to reduce demand as much as possible through insulation and make buildings less wasteful. But then for industry, we must recognize the industry's efforts to improve energy efficiency and do more with less through solutions like cogeneration. And if we look at the whole energy system, we actually can see that the most energy is wasted in the electricity sector. So there's about 200 MTOEs of heat that is actually released into the air through the cooling towers of power plants. And just to put that into perspective, and I was surprised to see that, that's the total amount of heat that industry needs in Europe. So that's a humongous amount of energy that is wasted, most of it coming from combusting natural gas. So if we can actually make sure that we don't waste energy in the first place, I think we would be able to make a lot of progress. And then finally, renewable energy. Of course, we need to diversify the supply of renewable energy sources. And the more diversity we have, the more affordable energy will be, I believe.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I saw Walburga reacting to some of the points that you mentioned. Walburga, if you were to look at the progress towards climate neutrality, where do you see the biggest achievements? Where do we need to work on more?
Thanks. before answering your question, I think what is very important in this debate is that at the end of the day, we need to have make ends meet. We are in Europe. We will spend much more on improving our security in the next couple of years. Only Germany is gearing up with 100 billion euros they want to spend on defense. Other countries will follow. So in the end, it's a very simple calculation. We need to go for the pathway which costs us the least. And that's a 100% renewable system based on electricity. We've done a study with LUT University, a Finnish university. The Greens in the European Parliament are also publishing a study soon from that same university, because it's convincing and it's saying that it costs us much less. And probably the difference is much higher now that we have these high energy prices. It costs us much less if we go down that pathway. Now, when I hear that there's so much losses on electricity, I couldn't agree more with you, Alexandra, because what you're talking about is combustion power plants, and that's what we don't want to see anymore. So if you base your system on solar, on wind, on other renewables, this is the kind of things you will not see anymore. So that is also supporting, our plea of going 100% renewables and as much as possible. Electricity, I do think and I agree that not everything can be electricity, so that is clear. We see a big role for renewable hydrogen to close the gaps for those industries which cannot switch to electricity. It only makes sense for those, because otherwise, efficiency-wise, it does not make sense. 5 elements of electricity have to go into 1 element of renewable hydrogen. So efficiency-wise, it doesn't make sense. But for industries, for transport, which is which you cannot or difficult switch, maritime, aviation, it makes sense. And this is where we would see also molecules going forward. And now I'm missing your question, Margosha. I'm so much passionate.
It was more about, I think that in a way you already answered that, on the progress that we're making, and how do you assess that?
Yeah, I mean, too slow. That's clear. I do think that there needs to be a paradigm shift in the way governments are thinking about the future. They really have to put their compass on renewable system and explore the innovative ideas. They are making renewables 24/7, for example. So storage through also smart renewable plants where you combine solar and wind, for example. Make land available. That was one of the things I already mentioned before. So there's many things where we need to rethink and really set our compass in a new direction, because the solutions are available. So we do not have to look for new solutions. The solutions are available. We just have to make bold decisions and implement them.
Thank you, Barbulka. And now it's up to Stefan. So you heard different ideas, different assessments where we are in this journey, but how does it look like from our industry's perspective? How do you see this progress?
Yeah, well, I would say that first of all, I hear plenty of ideas and a bit different approaches also. If I look on our industries, for sure we need some kind of stability and we need the competitiveness there, and we need the affordable and available electricity and heat for our processes. So and in the processes, I would say that sort of combustion will play a role also in the future, but of course we can use renewable sort of solid fuels in producing the heat and power we need, and through that also be sort of very climate friendly in the approach. Electrification of our process is probable in some ways, and for sure industries overall will be electrified, and I definitely believe that sort of electrification is one way forward, which will bring in then the question of sort of how will the grids work? How do we handle the volatility? How are we able to store electricity, and what role will hydrogen play there? And as a sector with biogenic emissions, I would say also that we are in a very, very nice position also to look into sort of new products which would be then based on sort of hydrogen and our carbon emissions. So different kind of synthetic products could also be possible for our sector, and to replace in a way the fossil consumption which I've been sort of stressing here. So I also believe that many of these systems and sectors will be integrated to something new, that also as consumers of an energy intensive consumer of electricity, we will play a role there. And I already know that we are sort of following the markets, and we are also producing and acting accordingly to how the markets are volatile, and depending on the prices, we can also select how we behave and to what kind of sort of price levels we sort of are flexible in our consumption. So the new system will be more complex. It will for sure be more renewable, but I also see that it will take some time for the European Union to make this shift, and it will be requiring a lot of investments and a lot of capabilities and competencies to make this change. We've built such a sort of perfect system now, which is then totally dependent on something we want now to get rid of. So for sure, we can for sure boost things, but I also see that reality is that we will need materials, we need raw materials, we need someone to construct all of those things, which will take a bit of time. So maybe saying that there is this short-term things, and then in the longer term, sort of more strategic direction we can take as a European Union. But sort of in the short term, we have this crisis now, and it's very much about mitigating the current crisis.
Thank you, Stefan. And I saw Heiko.
Yeah.
I believe that he's in the meeting. Just checking whether he is able to unmute himself. Well, our audience is a little bit shy. So before we jump to the next question to the panel, I would like our speakers to think of a question that maybe you would like to ask to another panelist, to sparkle a little bit of more conversation also between all of us. So far, I think that we managed to talk about ideas for policy, assess also where different technologies are, how this ties in for the industry, and also for the solution that will keep us competitive in this changing world. But prioritization is sometimes the key. You cannot do it all at once. So my question to Alexandra is, if you were to mention just one thing, this low-hanging fruit, quick win, what that would be in the energy transition?
Well, that's very easy for us. Energy efficiency first. That's really key. And we see, well, when we talk about energy efficiency, it's energy efficiency across the entire energy value chain. So from energy conversion to transmission, distribution, and end use. And what's happening within Fit for 55 is that energy efficiency is put first and prioritized for a very narrow segment of the energy system, which is demand. So we're focusing a lot on buildings, on reducing demand in buildings, which must be a priority, of course, but we're not focusing enough on the energy that is wasted before the energy reaches the consumer. And I think that's very important for industry because, as you have already explained, you're both producers and consumers of energy. So with a solution like CHP, you're able to be more efficient overall. And that's not really fully understood or recognized and I would say it needs to be addressed more and acknowledged more, that we really need efficiency in addition to renewable energy uptake.
Thank you, Alexandra. Valborga, one quick win, low-hanging fruit in the transition.
So first, Alexandra, here we agree completely. Energy efficiency of the whole system needs to be at the forefront, not just looking at buildings, but really system efficiency. Low-hanging fruits, as we have companies here, I would say get the framework right for corporate sourcing. And that is something which you can just fix very quickly easily in the Renewables Directive, which we're discussing in any way. Also, the Commission is coming up with some guidance. There is already some very good ideas floating, but guarantees of origin, very technical, but guarantees of origin harmonization is important. And that is something which you can fix very quickly, making it possible to have more companies also using renewable electricity and source their own electricity, providing also stability on the incomes, on the prices.
Yes, talking about companies, Stefan, what would you say is this low-hanging fruit and no-brainer from the policy perspective?
I would say is the, let's say, enabling policies which are then sort of giving opportunities for industries to invest and giving this long-term view of where we are going. Currently, we see a lot of changes happening all the time in the regulatory frame, which is maybe not still the sort of best possible investment of sort of surrounding for a company to invest in that. For example, now with the Renewable Energy Directive, where we are one of the ones who have been investing in advanced biofuels for traffic. We've been sort of in a constant process of changes all the time of the rules. And we are currently assessing opportunities to sort of scale up that business to something which would be really remarkable of size. And that kind of sort of demand is there for decarbonizing traffic. But from a company point of view, it might be sort of quite challenging to make investments if the rules are not sort of something you can rely on. And this is something we've been discussing for a long time. Maybe then, don't know if it's a low-hanging fruit, but for sure, I hope that we could have more attention on what the forest can bring in as a solution. Not purely looking at the forest as a carbon sink or the forest as a source of biodiversity, but how could we sort of get more recognition to the fact that we can combine economic utilization of forests to replace consumption of fossil products at the same time as we take care of the growth of the forest and the forest remaining a forest, the forest remaining a sink, and having this positive climate effect, and also combining the economic utilization of forest with improved biodiversity. So for us Finns, for sure, this is something which is very, very natural, living here in the middle of the forests. We should make sure that the sort of forests are taken good care of and given forward to next generations in even better shape. But in the European approach, I don't really see that this kind of recognition is given to something which can offer solutions and alternative for fossil consumption. I guess I said it already in my sort of opening words that focus is very much on energy and how to replace fossils in the energy sector. And that's something we've been very good on in European Union, even since, I don't know, beginning of the 2000s. We've been discussing sort of targets for renewables to replace fossils, and we've taken steps, but maybe we haven't focused that much on what are we actually consuming besides energy. What kind of materials are we using? How do we recycle? And these kind of things, I hope, would be higher on the agenda in the future.
Thank you, Stefan. So I hope that you thought of the questions I would like to ask to each other. In the meantime, we have another question coming from Yori. So what are the biggest challenges in the next 10 years? What is the biggest challenge to stay competitive in Europe? And I'll start with Alexandra.
Well, for the cogeneration sector, we see that there's the existing fleet of CHP, which plays an important role. We save about 30 BCM, because now we're counting everything in BCM, not in MTOEs of energy. So it's really important to maintain that fleet of high efficiency CHP, because otherwise, if we need to close a CHP down, then the electricity and the heat will have to come from less efficient and more polluting sources. Then there's also an opportunity to upgrade existing CHP to be running on renewable energy sources. So we've seen some examples, and it's actually in the pulp and paper sector. In France, Smurfit Kappa facility is trying to upgrade their existing CHP to run increasingly on hydrogen that is produced locally. And that's one thing that can be done fairly quickly and at low cost to reduce dependence on natural gas. And then, of course, there's the renewal of the fleet, and then there's still potential to replace some of the less efficient generation. As I said, power-only plants, they're quite wasteful, so it's critical for CHP to be prioritized for that inefficient production of electricity, but also heat. There's really a lot of inefficient boilers that are used by industry, which can be upgraded to a CHP that is renewables ready. So I think that's really the way forward for the next decade. And then the switch to renewables and the contribution towards net zero emissions will go faster and faster, I would say.
Thank you, Alexandra. Valborga, the biggest challenges in terms of competitiveness for the next 10 years. How do you see that?
I would like to zoom out a little bit and not talk about our sector, because I do think that more generally energy prices will be decisive on the competitiveness of Europe, very generally. We see that also in our own sector, talking about the PV manufacturing. We have one of the biggest polysilicon producers in Europe, Wacker Chemie. Their main ask in our industrial strategy is, please get us the energy prices down, the electricity prices, because there's so many other elements to electricity prices, and currently, the gas prices, who is driving electricity prices. And this is the major element for them. So this is one thing, energy prices, decisive whether we will remain competitive. And then the other thing is what President Macron has been calling for years is a strategic autonomy in sectors which we absolutely are dependent on and which we really need. One is chips. The European Commission has already taken some initiatives. This is also, very important for our sector. Inverters, for example, are depending on sourcing chips. But in many other areas, also Europe is also dependent. So I do think we need to look into where strategically we need to be not completely independent, but autonomous and able to still support the very important industrial sectors we have in Europe. When zooming in a little bit on PV manufacturing, we don't have, fortunately, any rare earths or raw materials which are not available abundantly. So that is the good side. But still, we need to source them from somewhere, and we need to really look into being not dependent on countries in elements of the supply chain, because that could turn against us. And material use, just because Stefan, you mentioned it, material use. Yes, that is a very important part of reaching this strategic autonomy, because let's just recycle everything we can in Europe. In order to reuse it. This will be more and more important, to not be dependent on things we need to source from somewhere else. So we're looking into that in our sector. We're not, panels, PV panels have a lifetime of 20, 30, sometimes more years. So we haven't seen really substantial panels coming back yet. But this is a very important topic going forward, and there's a lot we can reuse and use to produce new products again in Europe.
Thank you, Valborga. Yes, you mentioned the energy price. Stefan, you already mentioned the policy predictability. Alexander has talked about how, what are the challenges of achieving energy efficiency, not only at the industrial level, but also at the systemic level, where our mills play a role too. Any other challenges?
Well, I would even zoom out. So let's see. Well, I would still mention the overall the economy of European Union and this area of the world, and sort of let's face it, we are in global competition. We need to stay competitive. Best way to stay competitive is to ensure that our economies are in good shape, because that's also then ensuring that we have low costs. If we are drowned in different kind of debts and arrangements, we will also have a lot of cost involved, and that will also then challenge sort of the operating environment for anyone to invest here. So this is very, very broad, but I think we should focus on ensuring that we are attractive for investments and that we are attractive for innovations. And that will also then require some kind of sort of prioritization of industrial policies, which has maybe not been that high on the agendas of the European Union so far. But maybe we are in a situation where we are going back to a bit of basics of sort of what do we want to protect, what do we want to develop, and how do we ensure that that happens with our own sort of capabilities and resources available.
I see thumbs up from Valborga. And yes, we have 1 minute left, but I promise you that you're going to be able to ask a question to your fellow panelists. Any takers of that offer? Yes, Valborga.
Not exactly what you're asking, but indeed, I would have a question to you, Małgosia, because you have been mentioning that you're looking into the rooftop potential of your own industry. So just, are you able to give us a sneak preview or?
Not yet. Not yet. The only thing that I can say that we're going to look at our mills as sort of renewable energy hubs. So we're going to look at the waste streams, what is available in our processes from the forest management perspective, but also from the production perspective, the availability of land around our mills, and availability of space on the rooftops. Is it possible to even, we're going to look at solar, we're going to look at wind. This is coming. It's going to be challenging. Our industry is pretty versatile. So across Europe, we're talking about 900 mills, and each of them is slightly different. Each of them is producing a slightly different product, using slightly different energy mix. But I can promise you that you're going to have a sneak peek as well, once we have a little more substance.
Thanks.
So yes, I wanted to thank you all for this discussion. So Alexandra, Valborga, Stefan, thank you for your insights. I think that there were topics that we could all agree on, starting from the energy prices, policy predictability, making sure that there is a policy that facilitates installing more capacity of renewable electricity, but also policy that can support what we already have right now, for instance, in our industry. So cogeneration, and maybe making sure that there is more renewable gases in the future. And so with that in mind, I'm really sorry that Heiko and technology failed us today. But yes, the conversation on the Fit for 55 is not closed, and we're going to come back in April with another session when we're going to look at the competitiveness, the industries, and what does it mean to be a front runner in this energy transition. So thank you, our speakers, and thank you to our audience and all your questions. See you in April.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.